The pull that Fritz von Erich had in Dallas, Texas, that was no joke. You get caught with drugs at the DFW airport, and it just goes away.
It's an interesting topic. Which promoter had the most actual pull in their town? Not as a wrestling promoter, but in terms of what you can get away with and what you could do.
Well, a lot of people said that Nick Goulas is the one that got the NWA off the hook in the antitrust business in the late 50s because he was friends with Senator Estes Kefauver from Tennessee. I mean, you know, we've just talked about what Fritz could do in Dallas. Sam Muchnick in St. Louis, he knew everybody, every politician, every journalist, everybody in the media.
What about Watts in New Orleans? Was it ever like that?
Watts was good in Louisiana because his attorney,
the Athletic Commission,
was also on the Athletic Commission, Pepe Bruno.
Yeah.
Emile Pepe Bruno. And they had an archaic ruling in Louisiana for quite some time that there could only be one wrestling promoter authorized to be the booker of wrestling matches in the state. And that lasted for a long time. And there was Louisiana was so crooked politically, as long as you knew the right people, you could get away with anything. But Watts himself as a person probably had more pull in Oklahoma.
What about Bosch in Houston?
Gosh.
Remember when George Bush ran for, I think, Congress initially, he knew I have to go to wrestling and become friends with Paul Bosch. Well, they became real friends, but I have to go to wrestling and get to know Paul Bosch and get that audience. I mean, that's how powerful Bosch was in Houston.
Yeah. And, you know, and the Vern Gagne in Minneapolis.
He couldn't stop them from taking his house with eminent domain.
Well, but that was a long time after the heyday. That was in the 90s.
That's true.
When he was not only a star athlete from the University of Minneapolis, then he went to the fucking Olympics, and then he was on national television and comes back as a conquering hero in the 1960s. He was one of the biggest, 50s and 60s, he was one of the biggest sports heroes in the state of Minnesota. Legitimate sports, because he was an NCAA champion. So they all, by virtue of who they were, they all had television in their markets. They were all there for years and years and entrenched. And I mean, even in Knoxville, I talked to bankers and high-powered attorneys that his kids had snuck under the fence at Chilhowie Park to go see Ron Wright. So now, you know, guy's president of a bank, but he has fond memories of when he used to break the law to get to see this guy. So,
and which promoter had the least influence politically? Mike LaBelle? Which promoter had no influence whatsoever?
Well, you know, actually LaBelle, because of the boxing and the wrestling and the Olympic auditorium, I mean, it's Los Angeles, and in the overall scheme of things, people didn't give a shit. But he
lost his TV and put his hands up and said, "Okay, we'll go to Spanish language. Who cares?"
Yeah, but the size of the town out there, the wrestling promotion was not going to be the talk of the town like it was in Memphis or Atlanta or whatever at one time. But you know, they still had maybe. I don't know. I don't know how much pull old Bob Geigel had over in Kansas City. I hate to shit on Kansas City all the time.
Well, let me ask you this, and then we can move on. So Nick Goulas, primarily Tennessee and Alabama. Let's just focus on that.
Right.
We've seen pictures of various wrestlers with George Wallace, and you just mentioned another politician that Nick Goulas was friends with. If you were a politician in Alabama or Tennessee, and you were covering a district that had Nick Goulas wrestling, more than likely, did you know him and did you have a relationship with him in one way or another? When you were running for office, did you call up and say, "Hey"?
Well, yeah. See, that's the thing, is that Nick was from Birmingham. And that's why Birmingham was one of his, when they were able to bring Birmingham into the Nashville and Chattanooga booking office, that's why Nick always went to Birmingham, and Birmingham was kind of his town, and that was a Monday night town.
And it was Monday night, I was about to say, yeah.
So when they brought Memphis in, because Roy Welch, that was his town. That was right down the road from Dyersburg, the seat of the Welch family dynasty. he took care of Memphis on Mondays. So depending on what market it was, yes, George Wallace was the Alabama governor in the 60s, and you've seen a bunch of wrestlers' pictures because they were invited to the governor's mansion. Because in Birmingham on Monday nights, you know, if there's 5,000 people every Monday in Birmingham, those are a lot of fucking voters. And the wrestlers were all over television, and the ratings were huge. In Memphis, Nick never went. Nobody saw him. In Memphis, you know, they knew the power of the television, and local politicians would obviously at some point or another, you know, show up. But politicians getting involved with the wrestling companies happened more often in the 50s and 60s than it would later on. Of course, Miss Lillian, Jimmy Carter's mother, loved wrestling, and wrestling too was her favorite. So those pictures got in all the newspapers and everything. But on a local basis, yes, if you were trying to get elected on a local or regional basis in those days, it helped to have the wrestling fans because there were so many of them and the TV was so strong. And none of those cities down south at that point had professional sports teams, basketball, baseball, football, whatever. So it was wrestling and car racing.
Are we going to do more of these agent reports in the future?
I think we're going to have to, because Jack Lanza is starting to grow on everyone, as he did on me. And of course, he had the most famous line. I forgot to mention it when we talked about it after he passed away here not long ago, but he's the man that told me, you can't fuck up a cheeseburger. Because his wife would get mad at him. We'd talk about food and the shitty catering that Vince would insist on having at all the shows, which was back then was bland, tasteless chicken, grilled chicken, and pasta with no sauce on it, and salad. And Jack would say, every time he and his wife went to dinner at a restaurant or whatever, he'd order a cheeseburger, even if it was a big steakhouse. And his wife would get mad and say, why are you ordering a cheeseburger? Because you can't fuck up a cheeseburger. And often we'd be sitting in the corner having a non-fuckable cheeseburger. So I like Jack Lanza. But, you know, another thing about Jack, a lot of people knew this. Jack was like Wahoo McDaniel. Jack was like Jerry Lawler has become. Jack had some of the spray-on hair. We've talked about this. You remember I've mentioned this, that they carried cans of the spray-on hair. Because Jack had a big, you know, he had that jet black Jack's hair that he kept dyed, that it was so black it was blue black. Lightning bugs followed him around in the daytime, right? And he had the big bald spot on top, and he would have some of the spray-on hair that would, you know, cover up that spot. And I just have to think, what would it have been like if back in Jack Lanza's day, before he started losing his hair and having to spray paint his head, if they had only back then had keeps? It would have changed his whole life, Brian.
It would have changed his entire life. Dare I say his agent reports would have been even happier.
They would. They would have been happier and hairier because, folks, like Jack Lanza, 2 out of 3 men will experience some form of hair loss by the time that they're 35. Sometimes it's pulled out by the roots rather than falling. More than 50 million men in the United States suffer from male pattern baldness. And as I mentioned before, Hotchkiss Featherbottom suffers from the male pattern pubic baldness, which is an offshoot. There's only 2 FDA-approved medications that can prevent hair loss, and Keeps offers both of them. That's why it's a simple, stress-free way to keep your hair. You don't have to paint it on. You don't have to buy wigs or toupees. You don't have to go out and try to find witch doctors to cast voodoo spells on your head. No. All you do is you go to keeps.com, KEEPS.com, and where you can find convenient virtual doctor consultations over the internet, medications delivered straight to your door. You don't have to leave the house. The treatments start at just $10 a month because of the generic versions of these fine hair loss pharmaceuticals. And Keeps has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors. And every time that someone in the Tokyo Dome uses Keeps, it gets 7 stars. So, Folks, if you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss now, go to Keeps, KEEPS.com/JCE to get your first month of treatment for free. Keeps.com/JCE to get your first month's treatment for free. Don't be like Jack Lanza and spray paint your hair on. Be like Jack Lanza and eat a lot of cheeseburgers with a lovely and healthy head full of hair.
Or a burger without cheese if you don't like cheeseburgers. Because you can't fuck up a hamburger unless you add cheese.
You can fuck up a hamburger by not putting cheese on it. But once it's got the cheese on it, then it's unfuckable.
Unfuck-upable.
Or, do you often fuck cheeseburgers?
I don't fuck any burgers, but I'm just correcting your grammar.
Be fuckable?
Okay, your cheeseburger's unfuckable.
All right, just like your wife. All right, now that I got that, I led you down that primrose path.
Good job, good job.
We've got a big interview